Silver coins and intriguing artifacts. So folks who have been to my presentations before, they're used to deep dives into coin minutiae, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to have kind of a tour through coins, comparison of coins from different shipwrecks, and also some fun artifacts that have been found on a variety of shipwrecks. We can move on to the next slide, actually slide 2, because everyone already knows who I am. These words were recorded by Christopher Columbus in his personal log on September 11th, 1492. I saw a large piece of a ship's mast from a vessel of at least 120 tons. I tried to haul it aboard, but was not able to. And these words illustrate how fragile and uncertain life at sea was during the age of the great wooden sailing vessels. Some ships reached their destination, others did not. And the ones that did not are what led so many of us into this business and what brings so many of us here together today. So today I'm going to spotlight some similarities and differences encountered in some shipwreck cargoes, some related to silver coins, as well as some other fascinating artifacts. But first, a little backstory. Relatively little time had elapsed following Columbus's arrival in what are today's Bahamas, before the Kingdom of Spain's quest for riches, glory, and souls to convert resulted in the conquest of much of the Caribbean, Mexico, and the Americas, the New World. Gold was the precious metal Columbus and those who followed in his wake most passionately sought. In fact, in a letter to his monarchs, he rhapsodized, "Gold is most excellent, of gold there is formed treasure. And whoever has it may do as he wishes in this world and can even lift souls up to paradise," presumably meaning they can buy their way out of purgatory. And such is the power of gold. But silver was soon realized to be the most abundant treasure of the Indies. Once the magnitude of silver wealth was comprehended and seized upon, the Kingdom of Spain established royal minting houses in key areas to process and regulate what appeared to be an endless flow of the precious metal. In order to control and document the product in Spain's fastidious bureaucracy, silver was shipped from the Americas, already worked into coins and ingots. Tons of silver was moved each year from the Americas to Europe in the hulls of wooden ships that sailed in organized fleets. As an example, Dr. Corey Malcolm reports that the silver cargo of the 550 to 600 ton Etosha galleon alone has been estimated at approximately 35 tons of silver. To make most coins in the 16th and 17th centuries, blanks were hand cut from strips of silver, sandwiched between double dies and struck with a hammer, then edge clipped to achieve the appropriate weight, resulting in irregularly shaped coins with insignia that were typically off-center. The dies were made of steel, with insignia impressed into them by the sinking or stamping of multiple die punches, each punch being a component of the coin's design, as well as by direct engraving. Die carving, also called die sinking, was a skill and an art. Die carvers had to follow a specified design, but they naturally rendered the details uniquely, as we can see in these two coins struck with dies carved by two different artists. The crown shield side is considered the front or obverse. The reverse displays the lions of Leon, the castles of Castile, and a Greek cross surrounded by a curved treasure or quatrefoil. On either side, the symbols are encircled within dots and a legend. Philippus, sometimes followed by an ordinal number, then DG, Hispaniorum et Indiarum Rex, and if the coin is from a period in which dates were included in the legend, and depending on its condition, you may also see anno and a date. Coin iconography varies somewhat from mint to mint and also from reign to reign, sometimes significantly. And what you might encounter on any particular shipwreck will be influenced by factors including what year the ship went down and where its cargo originated. For example, regarding the when, most coins recovered from Florida's 1622 fleet shipwrecks were struck during the reigns of Philip III 2, and 4, all of whom were Habsburg kings. So these coins bear the Habsburg shield, and the symbols that comprise the shield represent the various individual arms of territories under Spanish rule at that time. When the power changed, the shield changed as well. And this is illustrated by this coin on the left, recovered from a 1715 fleet shipwreck and struck during the reign of King Philip V, who was born into the House of Bourbon, in other words, French royalty. His great uncle was Charles II of Spain, and in his will, Charles had designated Philip as his heir presumptive. So now we see a man born into the royal House of Bourbon inheriting the Spanish crown, and this change is reflected in the shield, where now Burgundy's fleur-de-lis claim 2 fields, its previous area above Brabant, and another taking center stage. Regarding the wear, coins minted in Mexico City, easily identified by flared crosses that end in an orb, were transported overland to Veracruz on the east coast of Mexico, and in Veracruz were consigned to New Spain fleet ships. South Seas fleet ships carrying cargoes from places like Potosi and Lima offloaded at the Isthmus of Panama. From there, their cargoes were transported overland to be loaded onto Tierra Firme fleet ships at Portobello. Tierra Firme fleet ships also collected treasure at Cartagena. These fleets all had the port of Havana, Cuba, in common, Havana being the final port of call for all ships before undertaking the voyage to Spain. That's not to say that a ship's coin cargo can be completely predictable. The contents of a merchant vessel traveling with the fleet for safety can vary considerably from one carrying tax revenue for the crown. And sometimes cargo from ships in one fleet were moved to ships in another, as we saw in the case of coins, ingots, and agricultural products transferred from New Spain fleet ships onto both the Atocha and Santa Margarita while they were in Havana. In any case, ships like the Atocha, the Santa Margarita, the 1715 fleet vessels, and the Maravilla, to name just a few, were all collecting wealth from the Americas, the New World, to transport to Europe, the Old World. It was mostly New World money with just a sprinkling of twice-traveled Old World money mixed in. But once this New World money reached Europe, it entered the stream of commerce there. Here's a view of some of the early years of New World Mint operations, with the Mexico City Mint being the first to open in 1536, the Lima Mint operating on and off, Potosi beginning in 1574, and the La Plata, Santo Domingo, and Panama mints having very brief lifespans. The Portuguese carrack São José is a good example of what the coin cargo of a year 1622 shipwreck that was not part of the New World-based fleet system would look like. It sank in 1622, the same year as the Atocha and the Santa Margarita, but it sank in the Indian Ocean. The São José was part of a flotilla that was en route from Lisbon, Portugal to Goa, India, when it sank off of Mozambique, Africa in 1622. So its cargo was a mix of European minted coins from Seville, Toledo, Segovia, and Madrid, along with New World minted ones that had been absorbed into the European commerce stream. An early study by the salvage company Arquinatus Worldwide of about 1/3 of the São José recovered coin cargo revealed 39% originating from Mexico City, 34% from Spanish Peninsular mints, and 27% originating from the Viceroyalty of Peru, with almost all of these from Potosi. As for gold coins on Florida's 1622 fleet shipwrecks, except for a small sample struck in Santa Fe de Bogota prior to the sailing of the 1622 fleet, the very first gold coins to be authorized in the Americas, gold coins on 1622 fleet shipwrecks were the European-struck private funds of individuals, and therefore exceedingly rare. To date, on Florida's 1622 shipwrecks, the Margarita has produced fewer than 80, the Atocha fewer than 150, and only 2 are known from the Dry Tortugas deepwater wreck. By 1715, however, gold coins were being minted in the Americas, with an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 recovered from 1715 fleet shipwrecks over the decades, and that estimate comes via Ben Castillo. These coins represent the Mexico City, Lima, Santa Fe de Bogota, Cuzco, and some Old World mints, and a span of dates from 1649 to 1715. Of course, these ships carried all variety of treasures. With officers, crew, and passengers came personal belongings such as medical and navigational tools, merchant shipments, precious gems and jewelry, and artistic and cultural souvenirs. In 2000, I was part of a Santa Margarita subcontractor team, and we had a diver, Phil Short, who discovered a dark, flat, and circular object about the size of a quarter, but with one side folded under and the other folded up. There were symbols on it, but barely visible due to a layer of marine incrustation. It was so small and nondescript that it could easily have been disregarded and passed over if it had been happened upon anywhere else. But of course, on the site of a historic shipwreck, everything is of consequence. After conservation, the markings on the artifact became visible. We could see that an Arabic number 20 clearly dominated one side. But the design on the opposite side was difficult to fully decipher due to the folding. The late Dr. Eugene Lyon recognized the small disc as a type of identification seal, once used for merchandise and cargo regulation. He felt that the partially visible markings were a coat of arms, though it was not a crest that he could identify. In the year 2000, the internet was just beginning to emerge as the resource it is today. There was not much information to be had on lead seals, but there were a number of resources for family arms. And initially, I thought that the legend on our seal was similar to the legend found on Spanish colonial coins, with the letters ET being as in Hispanorum et Indiarum Rex. And since the Santa Margarita was a Spanish galleon, it seemed reasonable to start my research with Spanish family arms. But no arms that I could find looked remotely like anything on our seal. I did learn from my internet searches that there were different types of seals, with 2-disc cloth seals joined by a connecting strip being the most thoroughly documented type. These folded around each side of a textile and were stamped closed. Ours, however, was a single disc without a connecting strip, and the fact that it folded under and over indicated that it was a bale seal used to fasten a cord that once encircled a parcel of merchandise. Finally, one night, while sending out a string of search queries, I got a hit. The name Professor Alexander Weber, an expert on lead seals, now deceased. In the following weeks, the late professor very kindly combed through more than 10,000 European coats of arms without finding a match. And then one day he called, very excited, and reported that he'd received a large shipment of seals, the contents of a small private museum in the Netherlands. Opening the first box, he reached inside, and to his astonishment, there in his hand was the same coat of arms, sword and 4 stars. It was not Spanish, and it was not a family crest. It was the seal of the city of Haarlem, Netherlands. Professor Weber explained that this type of seal would typically display a city's arms, while the reverse would record data such as the length or width of fabric or the weight of a parcel. The visible letters ET in the legend of our seal is in fact a portion of the legend Haarlem's Goed, or goods from Haarlem. Many of the goods to which seals like these were affixed ended up as cargo on ships and were traded throughout the known world. We now know of 5 lead seals recovered from the Santa Margarita site over a nearly 30-year span. Of these, the 3 we have been able to identify are all of Dutch origin. The Haarlem seal we discovered in 2000, another discovered in 1981 is traced to the city of Amsterdam, and the 3rd, discovered in 2007 and bearing a date of 1617, is deteriorated but has 3 St. Andrew's crosses in a vertical line. Symbols in common with our confirmed Amsterdam seal. In the 17th century, Amsterdam was one of the most important seaports in the world, and Haarlem, Netherlands, situated just a little more than 12 miles from Amsterdam, was renowned for the fine linens it exported. The other 2 Santa Margarita seals, one of them recovered by Mike Perna, working for Blue Water Ventures in 2010, each bear the initials WM, but their place of origin remains undetermined. Interestingly, not long after we discovered our Haarlem seal in 2000, Captain Vince Trotta discovered 2 lead seals on a circa 1681 shipwreck that he was directing in Ecuador. He faxed me, because it was around 2000, he faxed me a sketch of one of them, explaining that the 2 are identical. And there again were the Haarlem symbols of an upward pointing sword beneath a cross, with the sword bordered by 4 stars. And soon after that, Vince discovered a 3rd, and it was from Amsterdam. Carla Brouwer of the Stitching Archaeological Workshop Group in Haarlem explained that the Haarlem seal's symbolism is actually found in a poem by a 15th century poet, inspired by a legend from the time of the 5th Crusade. It tells of crusaders from Haarlem who fought as knights and succeeded in taking the town of Diamante in Egypt. In reward, the emperor bequeathed Haarlem a banner red as blood, with a sword pointing toward heaven. The Pope gave them their cross, and because they came so far, the patriarchs of Jerusalem delivered the stars. The accompanying legend, Visit Vim Virtus, translates to English as virtue has conquered violence. The presence of Dutch seals on these shipwrecks is tantalizing because of the complex historic relationship that existed between the northern Netherlands, the southern Netherlands, and Spain during the Spanish Golden Age period. In the early 16th century, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, had inherited his father's Netherlands territories. Charles was of the Spanish branch of the House of Habsburg. Later, he transferred the rule of Spain and the Netherlands to Philip II, his Spanish-born son. Philip's unpopular rule led to the Dutch waging a long war from independence from Spain, during which the northern territories, including Amsterdam and Haarlem, succeeded from the Spanish-loyal southern ones to form an independent republic, the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. By the late 16th century, the Dutch Republic was emerging as a formidable commercial competitor and adversary. A brief 12-year truce between the United Provinces and the Southern Territories came to an end in 1621. Dutch ships forged into the Americas, bringing coveted high-quality goods, undercutting Spanish merchants, impacting Spanish profits, and tormenting Spanish treasure fleets. In a circa 1626 petition to the Spanish crown, submitted by attorney Blas González de Ribeiro on behalf of 1622 fleet treasure salver and politician Francisco Melian, González wrote, "The Florida Indians, barbarous and indomitable people, threatened him. The Dutch enemy who infested those coasts in those days made him retreat more than once. And at last, they were the reason why he did not continue last summer." With the Dutch and other world powers keen on commanding New World wealth, Spain could not maintain its stranglehold on the Americas indefinitely. In the 1630s and 1640s, the Dutch founded colonies on multiple Caribbean islands and in northern Brazil. They controlled the Hudson River Valley from 1609 until 1664. New York City was originally named New Amsterdam, and Haarlem, New York was named after Haarlem, Netherlands. The Spanish conquistadors believed passionately in the power of silver and gold, and this belief propelled them to sail across vast seas in its pursuit. But what is treasure? What qualities contribute to the perception of an object as precious? Rarity would naturally rank high on the list. An object is considered rare when it is uncommon. Beauty, a quality that is more subjective and less immeasurable than rarity. Complexity, meaning that creation of the object is labor-intensive or difficult to bring to fruition. Agreed upon value, whereby a specific type of object, such as paper money, is accepted in trade for a variety of objects and services. And then there are the magical, mystical qualities that humans perceive or invest in objects to give them power. The same summer of 2000 that our team recovered the Harlem Bale seal from the Santa Margarita site, we also found this intriguing artifact. At the time, in 2000, we really didn't know what it was. Internet searches for similar artifacts returned images of less than a dozen somewhat comparable ones, none of which were shipwreck recovered, each described as jade, though it soon became clear that the term jade was being used very loosely to describe a variety of hard green stones. Queries to online professional archaeological discussion groups about the carved stone artifact were unproductive. I did find a 1990 Seahawk Deep Ocean Technology report that showed two similar artifacts recovered from the Dry Tortuga's deepwater wreck, which they had identified as whetstones. A year later, I was working on a different shipwreck project in a different part of the world, and my inquiries were put on hold, and they stayed on hold for nearly a decade. Then in 2008, circumstances put me back on the Santa Margarita project with a new group of subcontractors, Blue Water Ventures. Soon, their discoveries of more greenstone artifacts from the widely dispersed wreck site opened the door to renewing my inquiries. So now, Sandy Kavanaugh, curator for Mel Fisher's Treasures, and Dylan Kibler, registrar for the Mel Fisher Museum, were able to provide images of other 1622 fleet recovered objects of carved green stone. Of these, only number 83967 is similar in shape to 50049, being rectangular with squared edges and carved to a blunt end. But impossible to know if there was once any decorative carving or drilled holes. 3 others are long and slender with drilled holes and tapered ends shaped more like blades than 50049. And 81596 is oblong with a rounded end and visible carving just before the break. But by this time, 2008, internet searches led to numerous examples of greenstone objects variously described as celts, axe gods, pendants, and dangles. I was confused. What exactly was the difference? What made one object a celt and another an axe god? Well, in a nutshell, axe figures are objects shaped like a hand axe. Axe god figures represent a being and have a face, whether it's human or animal. Ones with drill holes may be described as pendants worn vertically or pectorals worn horizontally. When intended to be worn hanging from a belt assemblage, which would have been part of a royal costume, they might be described as belt dangles. Sometimes the dangles were suspended from a mask and hung from a belt, in which case the artifact might be called a belt mask or a belt mask with dangles. What they all have in common is that they began with an oblong stone form called a celt. The late Dr. Herman Smith, an expert on the coastal trading practices of the Maya, wrote of early Spanish reports that described jadeite cutting being accomplished with the use of a cord drawn back and forth in a sawing motion, using hard sand particles and water as cutting agents. Drill holes for suspending the piece were bored by twirling hollow bird bones filled with wet abrasives, such as hard sand or crushed jade. Upon arriving in the Americas, the Spanish quickly learned that the peoples of Mesoamerica, Olmec, Maya, Aztec, Toltec, and others, treasured green stones above silver and gold. The precious mineral jade and other similar-looking hard green stones were symbolic of water, fertility, rulership, young green maize, and of wind, breath, and the soul. This concept of jade as sacred and precious was also shared by the Nicoya culture of Costa Rica. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz de Castillo, a soldier in the army of Hernan Cortez, documented examples of the Spanish trading green glass beads with the Indians for gold, explaining that the Indians thought they were chalchuites, a green stone that they valued more highly than emeralds or gold. In his memoir, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain, Diaz de Castillo describes an incident in which the great Prince Montezuma, upon learning that the Spanish were approaching his provinces, sent orders to his governors that they should barter gold for the Spaniards' beads. Especially the green beads, Diaz wrote, which are something like their chalchuites, which they value as highly as emeralds. Diaz describes some chalchuites as being worth a vast quantity of gold, and episodes of the Spanish exchanging green glass beads, chalchuites, for gold are repeated in his chronicle. Diaz describes how shortly after the death of Montezuma, with the Spanish force under siege and preparing to retreat from Mexico, Cortez loaded 8 horses and more than 80 friendly Tlaxcalans with Mexican gold, jewels, and silver, as much as each could carry. The rest, he wrote, over 700,000 pesos in gold, was piled up in heaps for any soldiers willing to carry it. Diaz wrote that while many of the soldiers loaded themselves with gold, he chose to take only 4 chalchuites, the value of which later, he said, served me well in healing my wounds and getting me food. Because jade and other hard green stones were held in such reverence by New World cultures, carved objects such as axe figures were bequeathed as heirlooms. Is it possible that an artifact such as 50049 came into the property of a Spaniard through marriage or perhaps union with an Indian of aristocratic lineage? Were they stolen? Were they traded for? Or, since the resilient mineral jade is strong enough to hone the edge of a knife, did a soldier of Spain perhaps value it simply as a tool with which to sharpen his sword? Excuse me. All right. Okay, one last chapter. So we know the Spanish colonists adored their bling. Leslie Bird Simpson, in his book Many Mexicos, wrote, "Their taste for luxuries brought galleons from China, laden with silks, jewels, brocades, ivory, and spices. The magnificence of their habits and the splendor of their households transcended vulgarity." One type of personal ornament that Florida's 1622 fleet and 1715 fleet shipwreck recoveries have in common, attesting to their popularity and widespread use, is the personal grooming tool: fingernail, earwax scoop, toothpick objects of greater and lesser elaborateness. Here's a beauty recovered in 2008 from the Santa Margarita wreck site by diver Chris Rackley. High carat gold and featuring a human profile emerging from the body of what might be a dragon or other fantastical serpentine creature, uniting a toothpick at one extremity and an earwax scoop at the other. And here are some examples from the 1715 fleet, courtesy of the 1715 Fleet Society website. Henry Petrosky, in his book, The Toothpick, Technology and Culture, describes toothpicks as, next to the wheel, man's most universal invention. And while such instruments phased in and out of style over centuries, Petrosky credits the Renaissance period as a time in which the toothpick, alone or in a toilet set, exposed or in a decorated case, appears to have been worn and used most conspicuously and proudly. The toothpick, earwax scoop, grooming tool, and related toilet sets as jewelry nearly passed from human custom and consciousness altogether. Errol Flynn did not sport one in the film Captain Blood, nor Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, though it is undeniably a fascinating accessory. There are two particular reasons so very few jewelry pieces of this genre survived the centuries: economics and taste. Gold and silver money was valued entirely by weight. A person in need of quick cash or goods would use their jewelry as currency, and it would ultimately be melted down. Additionally, as jewelry styles passed out of fashion, it was common to melt and rework the metals into more contemporary designs. Consequently, if it were not for sunken shipwrecks and buried hoards, exceptional antiquities such as these might never have been reintroduced into the world. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for your kind attention. And I'd like to just add at the very end, from my greenstone artifact research, I want to give thanks to Mesoamerican art experts and educators, the late Barbara Kerr, Justin Kerr, and Dr. Sandra Noble, who is founder of FAMC, the Foundation for the Advancement of Mesoamerican Studies. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.